and welcome to another episode of Facts Matter. I'm here with Bob Schneider, Senior Research Associate at the Citizens Research Council of Michigan. Bob, how are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Monique.
Oh, perfect. Glad to hear that, Bob. So you wrote a piece about a week ago just about the state revenue picture and the opportunities that it could bring for the fiscal year of 2023 in its budget. Can you just give a little background information on the piece that you wrote?
Yeah, so in January, just a few weeks ago, state economists get together, as they do a couple times a year, to do revenue projections. And those revenue projections sort of are shape the amount of revenue that can be spent in the state budget that's going to be introduced. Governor Whitmer will very likely in the next couple weeks unveil her fiscal year 2023 budget proposal. And the news was great. Once again, as it has been for several of these conferences in a row, in particular, our general fund revenue, which is our discretionary revenue, that's kind of which drives 95% of budget decisions, is up significantly. We have $3.1 billion in extra revenue from that forecast across fiscal year 2021, which just ended. We had more than we expected in the year that just ended. We have we're expecting more in the year that we're in right now, fiscal year 2022, and then even more in fiscal year 2023. So $3 billion in extra revenue that now is available to be budgeted, in the future. And that will, we did some analysis of some of that is one-time revenue. Some, you can't add something about $3.5 billion we have in kind of one-time revenue that you can't build that into permanent programs, because once the balance goes away, you don't have any more revenue, and you got to cut the things that you just started. But the other important thing about the revenue picture that folks should understand is there is about $1 billion in available resources on a permanent basis. So, and that's a lot of money. That's, close to 10% of the general fund. So there will be room to add a lot to the budget. Or there's a lot of talk in Lansing now about tax cuts, and that's another avenue they could go to reduce the income tax, increase the earned income tax credit, and some of the things that are being talked about. But we have $1 billion in room to do something, add this, investments for state programs, tax relief, and that will drive, all those conversations for the next several months as the budget gets discussed.
And that's really good. It's really good to have that kind of revenue around, especially to allocate it towards the things that Michigan really needs.
Yep.
And just based on your research, Bob, how do you think that this money will be allocated, or what would be what will be some wise spending for this revenue to be allocated?
Right. So one of the things we pointed out that you saw on the blog is our revenue growth is looking real strong, looking real good now, very positive news. But what people I think often forget is we went through about 20 years between the beginning of the century to about 2000 to about 2020, where our general fund revenue that's so important to so many programs was completely flat. In fact, it went way down as the state had a very difficult first 10 years of this decade, of this century. Economically, it started to recover, but in 2020, our general fund revenue, not adjusted for inflation, the actual dollars, was about the same as it was in 2000. So for 20 years, we had no growth. And during that time, we had to cut a lot. We did a lot of significant budget cutting to kind of live within our means with the revenue that we had. So where could we make investments to sort of relook at those cuts that we had to make? I don't think anybody was happy making them, but we had to live with the general fund resources that we had at that time. Higher education, it got cut real significantly. In about 2012 in particular, we took a big cut to higher education, and general fund is a big finance source for our state universities. We are still down about 5% in terms of state funding for university operations. We're still 5% down today compared to where we were 20 years ago. because of that tough 20-year period that we endured. Another area is local revenue sharing. If we look at revenue sharing to cities, villages, and townships, we're still 15 or 20% below where we were maybe 20 years ago before we had the hard times. And that's real significant. And local units, we have a lot of local units that are struggling. Another social services is another area. It's a big set of programs that use a lot of general fund revenue. Behavioral health services would be another area I would point to where, in 2009, 2010, 2011, we took some pretty significant cuts to our non-Medicaid behavioral health program. So folks who are on Medicaid get behavioral health services, but there are a lot of low-income households that don't qualify for Medicaid, who rely on that non-Medicaid program. And that took some significant cuts, again, 10, 12 years ago. And we're still down in that area compared to where we were historically. So there are a lot of good areas that I think this money, this $1 billion, really gives the state an opportunity for the first time in a long time to look back at those tough choices we made back 10, 15, 20 years ago, and maybe begin to reinvest in some of those things that, as you say, are important, I think, to Michiganders.
That's really good, because even considering that the Michigan was in a single state recession a few years back, that took a toll on Michigan employment, public sector, a lot of different areas. And I just want to talk about, you mentioned in your blog about education. So we did another blog a couple of weeks ago about the education, but how important is this revenue forecast projection on the school aid fund?
Yeah, so we Craig Thiel, our research director, did a blog on that. I think just a few days before my blog came out. So the school aid fund revenues are also looking real positive. Now we've made some significant investments recently in K-12 to help under Proposal A, the funding gap between high districts with high foundation allowances and those with the lower foundation allowances has largely been mitigated. Now we've been able to bring everybody up to the same foundation allowance. The forecast was real positive for school aid fund as well. So that growth will help us maintain that, I think, over time. And we have big fund balances, both for the general fund and for the school aid fund that allow us to do some one-time things too. So the general fund forecast was really positive. As Craig noted in his blog, the school aid fund forecast is also really positive. If I remember right, I think we have close to $1 billion in sort of ongoing revenue growth that we can invest as the governor and legislature see fit in K-12 education too, whether that's raising the foundation allowance, whether that's investing in at-risk grants for districts that have students who may need more support.
Definitely, Bob. And is there anything else that you would like to explain to the listeners about your piece?
Yeah, I think the other thing we talked about the general fund and the fact that we had 20 years of real hard times with the general fund, that by 2020 we had basically just recovered all the losses that we had pushed on us over the prior 20 years. So we were right back at the level we were in 2020. Growth in that general fund is expected to continue to go up, which is a great thing for Michigan. I guess I would just note one more thing that I think surprises a lot of people is once, even with all this growth, and if we look out to the end of the forecast horizon that the economists use through 2024, even with the growth we see, where we're going to be above that 2020 level, if we adjust for inflation, we're still down about 20% from where we were, back at the beginning of the millennium, back at the beginning of the century. So times are really good for the general fund, but we still really haven't completely climbed out of that hole from, as you said, the single state recession and the really trying times we had for a couple decades here in Michigan, at the beginning of the century.
And just one more question for you, Bob. Do you think that with the opportunities with this 2023 fiscal year budget, do you think that it could provide a good starting point to get us back to a good place? Not to say we're not in a good place right now, but just to get us as a state in a better place financially.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think the state is already in a good place financially in terms of having revenue, both, you know, one-time revenue and ongoing revenue. And yeah, I think, again, this probably really gives the state a billion dollars that could be invested in higher education.
Mhm.
It could be invested in, those non-Medicaid behavioral health services we talked about, in revenue sharing to help local units of government who may still be struggling a bit post Great Recession. So yes, I think this is a unique year in that I think the amount of revenue really gives us the first real opportunity in a long time to start to look back at doing that. And there will be a lot of calls, and tax cuts aren't bad, but there will be a lot of calls for cutting taxes. The lawmakers and the governor should think back over those 20 years, though, and say, what holes do we need to fill? Because there are some that we talked about today.
Absolutely. And it's really exciting to be able to look forward to new things here in Michigan. Thank you so much, Bob, for your time. That's all for this episode of Facts Matter. Thank you so much for joining me, Bob. Until next time.
Thanks so much.